I'm going to talk about learning, not just in infants, but in young children as well. And my research interest, because I grew up negotiating 2 languages at home, and for me, it was always very interesting to understand how speaking different languages might have an impact on my thinking. So I was always very interested in this, just from a personal side of it. And I was really interested in infant development. And so my research has focused on how does acquiring language shape cognition, if at all, in both infants and young children. I'm just going to give you a flavor of what we do. You'll be visiting our lab later today. All right. So one of the questions that really fascinates me is, what do infants know, and how do they know it? So how can we study infants? And that's one of the things I'm going to touch on, because it is actually quite challenging to get usable data out of an infant. Okay, so my program of research, can you guys hear me okay? The light is really bright, so it's like you guys are just one bright light coming at me. All right, so one of the topics, oh, that's better. One of the topics that I've looked at is spatial skills in both infants and young children. And the reason I'm really interested in this is because languages actually differ in how they can describe spatial relations. So even though very early on, babies show, within the first month, show a sensitivity to spatial relationships as above, below, in, on, tight fit, which I'll talk about in a second. You probably doesn't make sense to you. Left versus right, in between, even within the first months. My interest, though, came from reading this paper that talked about the distinction between Korean and English with this one type of spatial relation. So in Korean, actions that result in a tight fit, so putting a cork in a bottle or snapping 2 Lego bricks together where they're snapped on, are described with the same verb ending. And it raised this really interesting question to me of whether babies from both cultures are equally sensitive to tight fit, and whether their language might help them pay more attention to these sorts of relations. And so in one study that we've done, and I'll talk about how we do it with infants, is we were interested in how flexible are infants. So are you equally good at paying attention to something going in, so that if you were an English speaker, it would be very easy for you to look and say, yep, that little toy is in the basket, and there's this little green peg that got inserted in. Is it easy for you to recognize that these two both share a containment relation? And is it equally easy for you to look at these 2 events and notice that this is tight on and this is tight in? They both share this tight fit. Or might it be that having some experience with language might help you recognize that commonality? And so to address this question, we looked at babies learning 1 language. They were 18 months of age. We did babies who were learning only Korean, and so we did this by going to Korea. But we also went to New York City, that has strong Korean communities, where you don't hear a lot of English, and in LA, in Koreatown, where also you don't hear a lot of English. And we tested 24 infants, and we tested 24 infants. These babies are from Ithaca, so I know they're not hearing a lot of Korean on the street, right? So so they were monolinguals. And we tested on whether they can actually recognize events that share a tight fit relation. So this is how we study infants, and you'll see this set up live soon. We have parents come in who willingly bring their babies to do research for free. We're not paying them. The baby sits on the parent lap in front of a monitor. And what we do is we present a series of events. So in this study, we did a tight fit event, 4 different ones, okay? And they see them sequentially, and we're recording babies' looking time. And yes, in case you're wondering, all babies are this happy every time they go through the study. Actually, Sterling, you did this study when you were 18 months old. Do you remember this? Oh, you don't, but do you remember this? Yeah. You're one of the English-speaking samples. So, all right, so thank you. Anyways. So we have parents, I mean, you ask who would do this? Parents happily come. I think because they're interested in their child's development. They sign up at the hospital, or I just approach them on the street. I know them, right? So I'm not scaring them. And they come in, and we're recording looking time to these events. And we're using looking time as a way to infer what babies see as interesting and different. So here's an example. This is how we do it. So what we do is we present an event over and over and over again, and I'll show you a video. Babies are typically pretty interested at first, so they watch for a long time. But what happens when something gets really familiar? Are you as excited to watch? No, right? You start looking away, and the babies do the same thing. And so we take advantage of the fact that babies get bored and they look less. And then that makes it so that we can present test events that present some sort of change. And we look to see, do babies regain interest by showing an increase in looking? Okay? So that's how we're testing, asking babies the question, is this new to you? And do you find it interesting enough to show an increase in looking? Okay, so here's an example of a baby going through habituation. We use an attention getter, all right, and that makes the babies look, okay, and we record looking time. And he's done. So then it ends, and the ding comes back on, and so he looks again. And now he's done, right? So you can see now he's getting a little bored. He's not looking as long. Okay, even shorter looks. Do you see now he's starting to habituate? You see the drool come out? And now we're presenting something new, okay? And so we can ask, we can look to see, do babies as a group, this isn't about any one infant, as a group, are babies showing an increase in looking when we present events that show some sort of critical change? And it's pretty short. I mean, it's only about 3 to 5 minutes typically. So do you see how he kind of looked a little bit longer there? And someone is using a computer to record exactly how long the baby looks. So we have an exact measure of it. We'll go back and look at it offline, and that's it. All right, so, okay, so in this specific study, what we did was we showed 4 events, and they're dynamic because we want babies to be engaged. And what happens is a hand comes in, picks up an object, and places it in a tight fit relation. And for the top 2, it's a tight fit in. For the bottom 2, it's a tight fit on. So this is what they look like in their final state. It only takes a few seconds. They'll play for 30 seconds. And this is what we show over and over and over again until babies start dropping their looking time, okay? And the question is, like, can they look at these 4 instances and say, aha, they all share a tight fit relation? Okay, so they would be grouped together semantically for Korean speakers. To test them, then once they've habituated, what we do is we present 4 test events. 2 of these events show objects they've seen before, okay, so they were habituated to these. But in one case, we change going tight in to a loose on. And the question is, if babies notice that change, they should show a nice increase in looking. We also showed 2 events with objects they've never seen before. And for us, this is really the critical question of, can they generalize to objects they've never seen before? You need to do this for when you use language, right? Being able to use it to novel instances. And here's a tight fit, here's a loose fit. Look how much cuter the turtles are, right? So on the one hand, babies could be simply interested in what the objects are. We want to know, are they paying attention to the relation? If so, they should look longer here, even though the cup and the dog bowl are not as exciting, than here, if they're really paying attention to tight fit. Okay, so here's what we find. And this is looking time in seconds. This is what we measure with infants, okay? And what you can see, here's an event they were habituated to, and they're only looking, I don't know, about 7 seconds. It's the same for both English and Korean learning babies. And we present a change, okay, so they notice this change. There's a significant increase. And then we show the objects they've never seen before. And what you find, or what we found, is that only Korean learning babies show that they see this as being familiar and this as being really interesting. English-speaking babies love the turtles, right? So they're only paying attention to whether the objects are more interesting to them, whereas the Korean-speaking babies are able to pick up on the fact that there's a common tight-fit relation. And so we think that it's because they have exposure to Korean. But it could be many things, right? It's a different culture. Maybe there's different ways of interacting. Maybe it isn't about the language at all. So how do we rule out these possibilities? Well, we take English-speaking babies, and we give them a word for tight fit, and we train them with them, and then we test them in the study, and guess what? Now they look like the Korean-speaking babies, right? So we can show that it's experience with how language is used and how it's referred to that motivates children to pay attention to the tight fit, okay? And that it's that without having this language experience, it's hard for them to form these sorts of categories based on tight fit. Okay, so in general, that's one example of how early language development can shape how babies form categories, what they pay attention to. But we can also look at how children learn language in general, and we can ask the question, are they learning language in contexts that are more conducive to promoting their language development? So one study we did was we looked at now pre-K kids, okay? And we looked to see, are they learning spatial language any better depending on how it's introduced, okay? So in this study, which we just did last summer, we went to Head Start, which are low-income kids, so you have to qualify to be in these pre-Ks. We took 25 kids. They were about 4.5, okay? And everyone was taught, we taught everyone spatial language. But one group got to do it as they built things. That was our constructive play. And another group did it while doing arts and crafts or looking at books, which, mind you, is one way that parents teach spatial language, right? You point out shapes in books, you do arts and crafts. In fact, we went to one pre-K before we started the study, and they were teaching shapes by doing a collage of shapes, right? So this is very typical, but we can ask the question, is one setting more conducive to learning spatial language? So for one group, we did things like origami, magnetiles. Do you guys know magnetiles? Yeah? Oh yeah, how many don't? Does anyone? Oh, you're missing out. They're cool. They're magnetic, you put them together, they form all sorts of different shapes. We did blocks, we did puzzles, we built with Legos. The non-constructive did equally cool. They did connect the dots. We did a shape scavenger hunt, so we made them these really cool binoculars, and then we put shapes up around the lobby, and they had to go find the circle, can you find the triangle? We did an I Spy book. We did a memory game with shapes, so they had a lot of exposure to shape language, as much. In fact, we tried to keep that exactly the same across these two contexts, okay? And we played with them for 5 times over a month, about 12 to 15 minutes. So when you add it all up, it ends up being about an hour of input that these kids get. So here's an example of one kid who was in the arts and crafts. So he didn't get to build.
So we're going to try to find, we're going to do a little scavenger bunch of shapes. Can you find this small yellow circle? Can you put it on the right top corner of the magnetic board? Good job. Now, can you find the purple semicircle? All right. Can you put it in the middle of the board?
All right.
In the center of the board. Now I'm ready for the center.
Okay, so lots of spatial language, right? Pretty interactive.
Now, can you find...
All right, here's the other kid. Here's the other condition.
SIG 19, -1.
I'm going to pass it on. So she gets to pick what card to build. She picks the tower. We set it up. Okay.
Let's start with this shape on top. What's the first shape on top? What's it called? Triangle. Can you find this blue triangle? There we go. Let's put it all the way on the top of the board. But we're going to lay it down flat, okay? Lay it down flat. Now, what's this shape on the left side, right under the triangle? What's this shape on the left side? That one? I don't think so.
All right. So, yeah. So, they're both getting a lot of spatial language input, but the question is, does the context in which you teach it matter? And so what we did before they participated in these sorts of tasks, training tasks, we measured how much spatial language they know. So we would ask them, can you name this shape? I mean, that's pretty hard. So we had to add in like a star and a heart, because otherwise they were like near tears, because they didn't know pentagon, right? They know circle, and they know triangle, somewhat. They know square, somewhat. Rectangle, not really. We also did, can you point to, we also measured their receptive. So can you point to the rectangle? That was easier. We measured their general language. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is the results, all right? And what you're going to see is a different score, all right? So if they didn't learn anything, they're going to be at 0. If they got better, then you're going to see the score be positive. Okay? If they got worse, Lord forbid, right, then it should be negative. And I'm going to show it to you for each group. Okay? All right, so here's the kids that got to build and do the origami, and here's how much they improved in how much they understood and how much they could say in terms of spatial language. And what you can see is that that is significantly better than the kids who actually got worse. I mean, it's not significantly worse, but they weren't really improving at all. So even though they heard a ton of spatial language, when they did it in things like arts and crafts, looking at books, or not really using the shapes in a meaningful way, they don't improve in their spatial language nearly as much as when they get to use it in a meaningful way, like build a cool tower. So that was really surprising to us, because I thought input is input. You hear it, it's kind of fun doing it in a book. Who doesn't love a scavenger hunt, right? And so, but it wasn't as useful for these pre-K kids. And then when we look at the number of kids who improved, here's the kids that built things, the origami and the blocks. And who improved? Out of the 12, 11. Only one child didn't get better. Now, is it the case that no one got better in the other group? No, about half of them did. It's just that half of them didn't improve. So this to us suggests that there are certain contexts that are more conducive to acquiring spatial language. Okay? So, but what's the significance of knowing more spatial language? Well, that's the next question we ask. So does acquiring spatial language actually promote spatial skills in kids? And so what we did was we did 33 kids, again, 4.5, and we randomly assigned them to either hearing spatial language as they played or simply playing with very minimal spatial language. And we tested them on different types of spatial tasks. So this is, I'll show you a mental rotation. There's spatial language, we did a jigsaw puzzle, and we just did a general vocabulary. And so this is one of the spatial tasks, and these are 4.5-year-olds, so this is actually pretty hard. So we show them the pieces, and you say, what shape with this, which of these 4 shapes does this make if you put it together? Okay, pretty hard. And here's an example.
Right. So we're going to do the same thing with these pieces. So I'm going to get these two pieces here, right? That one? Okay. Good. How about these 2 pieces? Oh, is that? So how about these 2? What shape do they make here?
That's totally wrong, right? So I mean, it's a really hard task. You have to pay attention to the features. Look at this one. And you can see that the amount of rotation or the amount of spacing is different across different items. Also wrong. Okay. But she's into it, right? She doesn't know she's bombing. We don't give them feedback. Okay, that one she got right. All right. That was one spatial task. Here's another one. This is called the picture rotation task. It had 12 items. And it's measuring mental rotation. And what you see how this character, here's the target. We point this out. They get 3 practice items. We want to make sure they understand. First practice item even has the options, the 3 choices cut out, so we can rotate and show them. And only one of these matches this exactly. Which one is it? Which one? Yeah. Bottom right, so all the way to the over. Okay, so this is an example of a kid going through this. Watch what she's doing with her hands. It's really interesting as she gives her response. See that? She's saying this one's really tricky, right? And you can notice that it's a 180-degree rotation. These are really hard for them, okay? So the more it's rotated, the harder it is for the kids. But she gets it right. Okay, so that's what we did at baseline. We also measured their spatial language like before, like can you name the shape? And then they got to pick them out, so that was their expressive. Tell us where the bear is, and that was really hard because they would say right there. And I was like, no, if I had my eyes closed and I can't see, tell me where the bear is. And one 4-year-old told us, just open your eyes. Like, so, and then this is the receptive, the comprehension, you know, so which one is behind the bowl and which shape is a rectangle. And they do multiple items, okay? And what we did was we played with them, again, 5 different times. They did origami. They would make this pig 3 times. They would do these shapes. We'd make a scene. They built Legos. We had to do that at the very end because then that's all they wanted to do, okay? And one group got spatial language, the other didn't, okay? They were about 10 to 15 minutes. It took place over a month. All right, and so I don't know that we have time. I'll be really quick. Here's an example where she doesn't get the language, really. But there's still some spatial language. He says corner, talks about folding. See? So there's still some spatial language. It's just really minimal.
Perfect. Now hold this. Okay. Can you press that?
Takes a lot of patience to do origami with a 4-year-old. They just don't have the greatest motor skills. All right. Here's an example of the language. So he talked about a triangle here. So he's giving her more spatial language, okay? All right, and then we did a post-test. Okay, and afterwards we looked at their spatial language, and not surprisingly, if they heard spatial language, they showed a huge increase in how much they understood. This is post-test. All right, mental transformation. We didn't get any learning here on this task whatsoever, but it did correlate highly with how well they did on the puzzle. But here was the cool finding. This picture rotation. These are the kids that heard the language as they played. This is the angle of rotation. These items are rotated more, and so they're harder. And you can see that kids that only played don't really improve. The kids that heard the language skyrocket in performance. So hearing the language as they played helped improve their spatial skills, okay? And the cool thing is that this was days later, and sometimes the kids even went on vacation for weeks, and then they came back, they still showed the gains. So, so hearing spatial language can promote their learning. And the nice thing about this is that when you think about trying to help kids improve their spatial skills, talk is cheap, right? It doesn't cost anything to give them that sort of input as they're playing. All right, so I'm going to wrap up. Anyways, thank you. That's it.